Morning, everybody. Welcome to our Sunday service. I would like to welcome especially our visitors and guests, and most of all, the people who joined us for the First Timers Weekend at the Expanding Light. Welcome. We sincerely hope this will be not your last time at Ananda. Welcome to all of you. My name is Maria Warner. This is my husband, David. It's our joy to be here with all of you this morning. I will begin by reading from Rays of the One Light. It's a book of commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda, based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Our topic this morning, ego, friend or foe. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ begins his Beatitudes with the words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." To be poor in spirit in such a way as to merit the kingdom of heaven doesn't mean to be poor-spirited. Rather, it means to see oneself as owning nothing, since all belongs to God. For all is a manifestation of His consciousness. St. John of the Cross wrote, "If you would own everything, seek to own nothing." That which the ego relinquishes, offering it up to soul consciousness, is reclaimed forever in cosmic consciousness. Nothing is ever lost. Paramahansa Yogananda tells the story in our biography of a yogi of the levitating saint, Badhuri Mahasaya. "Master," said a disciple of the saint once, ardently, "you are wonderful. You have renounced riches and comforts to seek God and to teach us wisdom." It was well known that Badhuri Mahasaya has forsaken great family wealth in his early childhood, when single-mindedly he entered the yogic path. "You are reversing the case," the saint's face held mild rebuke. "I have left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures, for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. How then have I denied myself anything? I know the joy of sharing the treasure. Is that a sacrifice? The short-sighted worldly folk are verily the real renunciants. They relinquish an unparalleled divine possession for a poor handful of earthly toys." The Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter states, "All things are everywhere by nature wrought, in interaction of the qualities. The fool, cheated by self, thinks, 'This I did, and that I wrought.' But ah, thou strong-armed prince, a better lessoned mind, knowing the play of visible things within the world of sense, and how the qualities must qualify, standeth aloof even from his acts." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I'd also like to welcome everyone here this morning. And we'll start with a reading from Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda. My eyes are enthralled, O Father, with the beauty of earthly flowers, with life's passing scenes, and with the sailing silent clouds. Everywhere all I see hints at thy hidden presence. Open that eye in me which sees only thee. With that gaze may I behold thee, above, beneath, all around, within and outside me. Teach me in all things to see only thee. Open in me that eye which beholds everywhere thy hidden but ever subtly reigning wonder. Om. Amen. The subject today is ego, friend or foe. If it was one or the other, I could just say which one it was and sit down and we could go on. But with spiritual teachings, usually it's both and either or, and in this case it's the same. If we didn't have ego, we wouldn't be here. We would be a rock or an animal, and according to the yogis, the soul as it evolves must first develop ego before it can transcend ego. And so ego in a way is our friend because now we can get on and offer it into God, offer it into the light and become free. But it also can be our foe because it can keep us bound and shackled and suffering and identifying with his very, very little self. Many people have this misunderstanding of the spiritual path and of the ego. There's this thought that we must kill the ego, and in some teachings, which I think misinterpret probably their own spiritual masters, it's taught that you have to kill the ego. But in fact, you can't kill the ego. The ego is part of God. It came from God. The problem is that, as Yogananda put it, we are hypnotized by the ego. We think we're this tiny little self, as Swami Kriyananda puts it, a tiny bundle of self-identification. And you see yourself as this man or woman and with this problem or this issue or this strength. And so you start identifying with yourself and your ego becomes very small and contractive and turns in on itself. The answer isn't to kill the ego. The answer, according to all spiritual masters and what our own Guru Yogananda taught, is to expand the ego, not by becoming egotistical, but by offering our ego into the infinite, by expanding it into God's light. It merges into God and becomes infinite. And this beautiful chant of Yogananda, I am the bubble, make me the sea. And that really is the whole of the spiritual path, is finding out how to transcend our ego, how to offer it into the light of God. And we can't kill it. And the other part of it that is very interesting is that God's not going to kill it for us. God's not going to pop the bubble and merge us into the ocean. We have to offer this little self into the infinite self. And this really, in a sense, is almost the whole of the spiritual path. There's a beautiful book Swami Kriyananda has written called Sadhu Beware. At one time, I think recently, he said this is one of his 4 or 5 most important books. And it's not the most well-known. It's ostensibly about how to be a renunciate, and much of it does cover how to be like a monk or a nun, that type of renunciate. But really, it's for anyone who wants to renounce the ego. And I think that's probably everybody here today, because we want to be free of this shackle, this limitation, this suffering. And the way Swamiji puts it here, he says, and this is the importance he gives to transcending the ego. He says, the first duty of every soul is to release the hold that ego consciousness has upon it. All other spiritual practices are subservient to this one supreme obligation. I address ego transcendence, therefore, as the first and indeed the only challenge on the spiritual path, whether one be a renunciate, a householder, or living for God in some other way. And if you read Yogananda's poem Samadhi, which he recommended that you read and memorize every day because it really distills the essence of this path of offering ourselves into the infinite. It's all about not killing the ego, not making the ego smaller, not destroying it, but expanding it to the boundless reaches of eternity. There's wonderful lines from that poem. samadhi, where Yogananda says that it's not an unconscious state or mental chloroform without willful return. Samadhi but extends my conscious realm beyond limits of the mortal frame to farthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. And this really, again, is the distillation of the spiritual path, is finding how to offer our little self into the infinite self. Again, there's often misunderstanding that the way out of this is through abject humility and this whole idea of the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, and shrinking in on ourselves. And there's a story, it's a joke, but it's also a story. And because there's some first-timers here who probably haven't heard it, many others probably have, so it bears repeating. But because it really addresses directly this subject today of transcending the ego and how not to transcend the ego. But the story is that there's a rabbi who is standing before the altar one day, and he looks around and realizes that this is a wonderful opportunity to show just how humble he really is. And so he goes up to the altar and lays down and throws himself at the feet of the altar. And he says, "Lord, I bow before thee and show how worthless I am and what a small person I am. And Lord, I am nothing." And he says it looking around very portentously. And so his assistant looks at him and thinks, this is a good idea. And the assistant goes up, bows before the altar and says, "Lord, I am nothing." And he lays down before the altar. And finally the janitor is there, and he looks over and he sees these people doing this, and he thinks this is a good thing. So the janitor goes up to the altar, and he actually has less to be proud about, so he's less pretentious about it. And he says, "Lord, I am nothing." And he lays himself down, and the assistant looks at the rabbi and he says very, very haughtily, "Well, now look who thinks he's nothing." As Swami Kriyananda once said, early on in the spiritual path, very early for him, he said he realized he was getting proud of his humility. And we think that if the more humble we are and the smaller that our ego is, the closer we are to God and the closer we are to truth. It was a real eye-opener for me when I came to Ananda one time, and when I first came here, because I had certain misconceptions about the spiritual path. And I came to Ananda, and I immediately knew from watching people here that people here had what I wanted, which was divine joy and inspiration. And Swami Kriyananda was out of the country at that time, and it was a few months before he came back. And I was actually surprised when I first started watching him, because I knew he was the founder of Ananda, and he was a saintly person, if not a saint, or I didn't know. But as I started watching him, I was a little puzzled, because I was expecting the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, and someone who was quiet and self-effacing, and that was my idea of saintliness. And he was very much out there and very gregarious in a way, and when he was with people, and a lot of laughter around him and just a lot of joy, and he wrote a lot of books and wrote a lot of songs. And I started thinking, well, scratching my head, there might be a lot of ego here. And I wasn't sure. I wasn't making a judgment, but I really wanted to know. So I started watching him for a while and trying to decide, well, is this ego or is he a saint? I knew it had to be one or the other because of his energy. And it actually took me a few months. And oddly enough, it was at a Christmas celebration, the first Christmas here. And he was reading P.G. Wodehouse, which is a humorist who's very, very funny. And as he was reading, he was laughing and laughing. And I was inwardly watching and just still trying to figure it out. And because I was inwardly watching and meditating, I had an inner experience and very strong intuition of just pure divine joy that I felt coming from him. And it was just in the highest and deepest sense. And I realized that all this laughter and expression and creativity, art, music, it was just the purest expression of divine joy. And Swamiji has recently addressed this. He's talked about it, and he says that divine joy wants to express itself, wants to share itself, wants to spread itself. And it's the nature, when you feel divine joy, to share it with others. And it just, in and of itself, it wants to create and spread and touch other lives. And this is when I realized that the way to saintliness, the way to spiritual freedom, is when we offer our little self into the infinite self. The boundaries of the ego and all these limitations and self-identification start to dissolve, and there's no boundaries to the little ego. And eventually, as the poem Samadhi says, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. And so the answer and the way out is everything that we do, offer it to God. All our attachments, rather than trying to suppress them and deny them and say in abject humility that I don't have this and I am nothing, take those things and offer them to God. If you have a desire or an attachment to start a business and it just won't go away and you offer it in meditation and it still is there, start that business, but do it for God. Do it as service to others. Share it with others in a divine way. And you'll find that this little, as Swami says it, this tiny bundles of self-identification dissolve and expand, and you become free. This is the way to freedom. And this, in fact, is the whole path of meditation that we teach. We have this astral spine that the yogis teach us, which the energy must rise from the base of the spine up to the spiritual eye and unite there. But what's the last place that it has to go through before it reaches the spiritual eye? For those of us who know, it's the medulla, the ego center. And so that very last place, it must get spiritualized. And finally, we must take that energy from the ego, the medulla, and offer it into the light. And that's the way to freedom, is when we offer our little self into the light of God with complete devotion, with humility, but not this false humility, with just freedom and childlike joy. We become free because we're no longer identified with this tiny, contractive little self that just keeps us suffering and keeps us going again and again through all these little problems. It's so funny because we watch other people, and it's so easy to see other people's delusions. And someone stumbles a certain way, and you think, well, geez, there, but for the grace of God go I, and some other delusion that seems so silly, and some person is so uptight about something, but ours are really different, you know that. Ours are very serious and very real, and well, let go of these little things. Let go of yourself. Take yourself a whole lot less seriously. Take your own identifications a lot less seriously. Share these things with the infinite. Share them with God. And again, this is the way to freedom, not by denying it, not by suppressing it, not by killing it, but by transcending and transmuting it. This joy, I just want to touch on what I was mentioning about Swami Kriyananda. This divine joy does express itself in very outward ways sometimes. And what I was saying earlier about watching how he would just laugh gregariously and joyfully. And again, I was thinking, gentle Jesus, meek and mild. But if you read the lives of the saints and masters, this divine joy continually finds ways of expression and sharing. If you read of the life of Ramakrishna, his disciples, when they were around him, were always just could hardly contain their laughter because he was so funny in certain ways, where the way he would mimic people and tell jokes. And Paramahansa Yogananda, the same way. Swami Kriyananda talks about laughing so hard at Master telling a joke because Master was laughing so hard that Swami couldn't even understand what Master was saying. But just his laughter was so divinely infectious that it had everybody laughing. And so divine joy expresses itself in every possible way. And the way out is to share this with others. What joy you feel, share it with others. What gifts you have, share them with others. I'm going to read a little bit from this book of Swamiji's, Sadhu Beware. And I would really recommend people getting this book because he talks about so many ways to overcome ego, and he actually gives about 30-some little techniques of ego transcendence, as he calls them. I'll just read a few of them as a way of teasing you just to go out and get this book. The first one, when you see something you'd like for yourself, buy it if possible, Accept the satisfaction of possessing it. Then, however, give it away with a free heart to someone else. And then he tells the story of something that he really appreciated on a travel that he was doing. And rather than suppressing this attachment and this desire, not in an egotistical way, but seeing something beautiful. So he bought it, and then when he got home, he gave it to someone and shared it with someone. When you give something away that you have, it only expands. When you have a little bit of joy, share it with others. When you have some inspiration of God, share it with others. This doesn't mean, for those who maybe are visiting here and going back to the city, it doesn't mean standing up in your office one day and raising your finger and saying, "Repent, all ye sinners, lo." But it means sharing in very simple ways your divine joy with your friends. I think some of the saintliest people at Ananda that I'm most inspired by are ones that never get up and say lo and give Sunday services and grand talks. They're the ones who in daily interactions, the divine just comes through them, their joy comes through, and they're just divine sweetness. And so find ways to express your own innate divine joy with others, and you'll find that it expands and grows over time. Another one, when people praise you for any reason, don't accept their praise in your heart. Don't say ungraciously, for example, "It was nothing." That would mean deprecating their good taste and common sense. In fact, it would mean answering a compliment with an insult. Thank them sincerely instead, but then give the credit to God. Do so in words if you like, but much more importantly, give Him the credit in your heart. Tell yourself, God is the doer. Wonderful lessons in here for daily living, for transcending the ego. When someone else gets the credit for something you've done, don't look for a way of letting people know where the credit really belongs. It would be natural enough for you to do that. You needn't even consider it a fault. Still, don't take too much of it. You will find much greater freedom in your heart if you mentally give all the credit to God. I remember one day, early on at Ananda, we had a work day. And as we often do at work days, somewhere during the after lunch or sometime, we sort of thanked people who had done a lot for the work day and giving a lot of credit and praise and cheering people for this and that. And there was one person who was being given a lot of credit for something that he didn't really have a whole lot to do with. And I was near the person who did have a whole lot to do with it. And this person was a little bit of a grumbly sort of person. And his response was, when this other person got the credit for what he had done, he got really, really upset. He stormed out of the place, stormed out of the room. And I thought, uh-oh, this can be a problem. And it was. This person left. And just in a huff, actually, over time, because of this little thing of ego, this fragile ego that wasn't feeling praised enough. So when someone gets credit for something you've done, remember all the times you've probably gotten credit for something that someone else did, and realize that it balances itself out over time. There's a beautiful story of a saint who was a potter, and another saint came to visit him, and this other saint who came to visit was a little bit proud, and the potter saint went around and very incongruously began slapping people in the face. And his disciples were used to this and accepted it and accepted it as a blessing from the guru. But when this other saint got his slap on the face, he got very irate. He wasn't used to being slapped on the face. And he stood up and got very, very upset. And the potter saint noticed that he did this, and he says, this pot has a crack in it. Because that's how you find out if a pot has a crack. You tap it, and if it rattles a little bit. And so this saint, by his reaction, had a little bit of ego and realized that life and God have a way of slapping us quite regularly, even for the most justifiable of reasons. You know, someone is praised, and we really did the work, and we should have gotten praised, and we can justify it every which way but Sunday as justifying why we should be upset. But watch your own reaction. If you get upset, this pot has a crack in it, and work on fixing that crack, offering it to God, praise and blame eventually should be the same. They should both be given to God. Whatever comes to you, give it to God in that way. One more. He says, make it a point not to feel badly when you make a mistake. It would compound the mistake if you insisted you didn't make it. But when you err, acknowledge the error calmly and cheerfully. If possible, don't even say to yourself, I made this mistake. Say rather, the mistake got made. I had a wonderful lesson very early on at Ananda where I was working in the garden and I borrowed someone's truck, and it was Ram Das's truck who was here today. And I am always grateful for this lesson he gave me, which is cars and trucks in those days were very valuable. There was about 1 per 20 people, and so you treated them very carefully. And I wasn't very careful with this truck, and I smashed the door in it so it couldn't close and just really made a mess of it. And I felt very, very badly when I returned it to him. And he just so sweetly said, well, you don't take all the credit for serving in the garden for almost no pay, and so don't take credit for this mistake. Give it to God. Give it all to God. And this is the way we should do with our mistakes, with our wonderful things that we do. Give them all to God, and you'll find that praise and blame, ego and contraction, and this self-identification over time start to get dissolved, and we become more and more free. The last one in this series of suggestions that Swami does, he has over 30 of them. But the last one, he says, these should be enough suggestions for now. The important thing is that any thought of yourself should be offered up instantly to God. Spiritual liberation comes not in one grand overarching leap, but by little increments, of which the points I've suggested above will take you soaring. And oddly, his last recommendation isn't something to work on ourselves and introspection. His last one is perhaps the most important. He says, Paramahansa Yogananda suggested that we memorize his poem, Samadhi, and repeat it daily. In essence, he meant also that we should always dwell on the thought that our true reality is infinite. Make the state of omnipresence your constant affirmation. There's the last line in the poem, Samadhi. And if you want to take a homework assignment home with you as a visitor, I'll give you a homework assignment, something to have fun with and experiment with. The very last 3 lines of the poem Samadhi, very easy to memorize. Yogananda says, eternity and I, one united ray, a tiny bubble of laughter, I am become the sea of mirth itself. Take these last 2 lines. In the next few days, repeat them. Take them into your meditation. A tiny bubble of laughter, I am become the sea of mirth itself. There's a beautiful recording of Yogananda where he repeats these 2 lines over and over and over again. I, a tiny bubble of laughter, am become the sea of mirth itself. And he says it with so much joy and enthusiasm and expansion. So take that to heart, because really that's the way out. It's not to kill our ego. It's not extreme self-abnegation and super humility. It's expansion and self-offering, and this realization that we aren't small. We're very, very large. We're infinite. And this tiny bubble of laughter will become the sea of mirth itself as you awaken this, as you affirm it, and as you offer this little self into the light of God. Bless you all.